crowd before we even started. Okay, so good afternoon or morning or evening or whichever time zone we happen to be in. So we are learning Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, the abridged code of Jewish law, chapter 93, and I think we're up to number 3.
Chapter 90.
We're in the middle of 2. So the laws if someone gives birth, or just before, or just after on Shabbos. So just to summarize number 1, just so we, as we're at the beginning of the chapter, as soon as a lady starts going to serious labor, then we consider her in the category of someone who is not well to the point that it could be life-threatening, God forbid. So we do whatever needs to be done on Shabbos. I think we're in the middle of number 2 last time, so we'll start number 2 again. So Yoledis harihi kachayla sheish b'sekona. Now a Yoledis, that's the lady giving birth, and we're going to give the definition of when does that start, when that ends shortly. But in the meantime, without defining it, this lady is in the category of someone who's not well, and there's potential risk to life. Chamaleh is a Shabbos, and we will break Shabbos. It overrules Shabbos. The Cholmash is Siricha, whatever she needs. So obviously, what she doesn't need, it might be nice to run to the store and get a chocolate mousse, but that's probably not going to make a huge difference to her health. So whatever she requires for her health, we do on Shabbos. However, if it's possible to do the act through a shinoi, which means some type of different way, an unusual way. Now again, as we mentioned in the past, when we need to break Shabbos or overrule Shabbos or life-threatening situation, if we can do things in a different way, we do. But if that's going to slow us down and time is of the essence, then we don't worry about it. But if it's just something that has to be done, and it doesn't matter is at this minute or in 5 minutes, if we can do it in an unusual way, that's better. That means even a right-handed person doing it with a left hand, or you press a button with your elbow, any unusual way is better. Or al yedei goy, or if we can get a non-Jew to do it. So let's say we're going to call an ambulance or call the doctor. So if there's a non-Jew available to call, that's much better. If they're not available, then if time's of the essence, then we don't start looking for one. So if we can do it in whatever we need to do, if we can do it in an unusual way or through a non-Jew, so we do it like that. The Nikreis Yoledis. And she is called, this lady, when she's called a Yoledis, we're going to give the definition now. So this lady that over her situation overall Shabbos, this Yoledis, it starts with Shashev ala Mishba, when she has to sit on the birthing stool, Mishasha dam shaisim yored, or from the time that blood sort of comes down, there's a flow. So essentially, once the heavy contractions start, or she's in a situation where she can't walk on her own. She's also in that situation. Now, this is not only a lady who's giving birth properly, but even, God forbid, we should know from this situation, but Gam also, a lady who's miscarriaging, God forbid, 40 days after she last went to the mikveh, we also put her in this category and we'll do whatever we need to do or whatever she needs done. So that's when it begins, when labor starts. So the contractions are strong enough, either she can't walk, it's pushing out all the fluids, or she has to, sit down or something. She has to She can't stand up on her own. Okay, number 3, Gimel. Now, how long does it last for? There's going to be a few different categories. Now, although I'm giving, these are general categories, these categories only apply if there's something, if it's the usual, right? If there's something highly unusual, God forbid, someone starts hemorrhaging or there's some other complication, then these categories don't necessarily, they won't apply. We're just saying when things are going in the usual way, a healthy mother, but even a healthy mother after childbirth is weaker than usual, right? So we'll when there's no other complications. Number 3, Kol shloishi yomim harishonim, for the entire first 3 days after giving birth. So she's gone into this category from the time the labor starts getting heavy, and it's going to continue for the first 3 days after childbirth. Even if she says, I don't need you to do this on Shabbos, nevertheless, if we feel needs to be done, we feel we have to call the doctor, we feel some type of procedure or medication, or to take her somewhere to be checked, for the first 3 days, we're totally overall Shabbos. Now, after 3 days, im ein ba choli, if there's no acher, there's no other sickness, right? There hasn't been a hemorrhaging, there's not some side issue or a co-issue, it's just the regular recovery period. So after 3 days, Rak Sarah later, she just is in a bit of pain and discomfort from after childbirth. Ad Shiva Yomim, so from 3 days till 7 days. If she says, I need it, so she needs to get to hospital, or I need the nurse, I need the doctor, whatever happens to be, Machal Maleha, we will still overrule Shabbos if she's saying definitely I need, whatever it is. Then if she says she doesn't need it, we don't overrule Shabbos. So the first 3 days, we're going to do whatever we need, whether she says she needs it or not. Between 3 and 7 days, then it's her call. If she feels that she needs to get to hospital or she needs to call the doctor, we're going to do that. And if she feels she doesn't, then we don't. And we count these days from the day she gave birth, not 24-hour periods. So what do we mean by that? Going for example, if she gave birth on Wednesday towards evening, so let's just make up a time, 5 o'clock in the evening. So it's still before sunset. Then the following Shabbos is after 3 days, because we're going to say Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, even though it's only a small part of Wednesday. The im yalda b'Shabbos leis erev, and if she gave birth on Shabbos again towards the evening, we'll say 5 o'clock again. Then the following Shabbos is already after 7 days, because we're not doing 24 hours. If we would say 24 hours, then the 3 days would be up 5 o'clock again on Shabbos if she gave birth on Wednesday at 5 o'clock. Day 1 would be 5 o'clock Wednesday to 5 o'clock Thursday. 2 would be Thursday to Friday, and 3 would be Friday to Shabbos. But we're not saying 24-hour periods. We're just saying a calendar day. So even though Wednesday was almost over, it still counts as day 1. So we'll have Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, and Shabbos is after the 3 days. Or if there's any even a small concern about life-threatening situation. Let's say this woman is she's weak by nature, right? She doesn't have a lot of energy, so not feeling well really sets her back and can be more dangerous. Then we can be lenient and we'll count it as 24-hour periods, and we're not going to lose anything. So just to summarize, Yoledis, the lady who's given birth, or about to give birth, or has given birth, we overrule Shabbos. This category of Yoledis starts when the labor starts, the good, proper labor, and it continues until 3 days after childbirth, and also another few days until 7 days if she says she really needs something. After that, providing there's no other issues, right? So we have no other concerns, then she's going to go back to what we're going to say in the next one. She's like a regular sick person, like someone who's bedridden. We're going to, we'll mention the next chapter, in the next number 4, like someone who we don't break Shabbos for, but maybe we'll get a non-Jew to do something. And again, this providing that there's no side issues or complications. Okay. Number 4. If you have any questions, let me know. La'acha shiva yomim. Now, after the 7 days, even if she says, I need, right? She says, I need to go to, I need you to call or the doctor, whatever. Now, again, there's no other issue here, right? If there's another issue, someone says, I'm thinking of a heart attack, God forbid, then for that, we will overrule Shabbos. But if it's just the regular recovery of childbirth, which is very easy for me to say it's just the regular recovery, but if it's just the regular recovery, then we're not going to break Shabbos, unless there's some other issue. Rather, we're going to look at her between the 7 days, once the 7 days are up, until we get to 30 days, we'll consider her a person that's sick, but not in a life-threatening situation. And will do whatever she needs on Shabbos via a non-Jew, need be. However, to heat the house, we can even do through a Jew, right? If she's very cold, or the baby's cold, then we can. Literally it means to light the fire, but most heating systems today aren't necessarily lighting the fire, but we can heat up the house for her. This is Shloi Nimsa by Menakel, unless you can find a non-Jew easily. So if you can find a non-Jew easily, then let's have the non-Jew turn up the heat, or turn on the heat, or stoke the fireplace, whatever it is. But if we can't find one easily or quickly, then even a Jewish person can do whatever we need for the heat for 30 days, within 30 days. Now, this is even in the middle of summer. It's not only, like if it's, freezing like it is here, we're down to 54 degrees, right? Not only that, but even if it's the middle of summer, if she feels very cold, up to 30 days, then we can put on the heat. Because a lady giving birth, after she's given birth, for the first 30 days, can be dangerous for her if she's cold. Okay. Hey, number 5, unless there's any questions. Okay. Havlad shenoilet. Now, till now, I've been speaking about the mother. What about the child? The baby is born. So let's say the baby is born on Shabbos. What can we do for the baby on Shabbos? We can wash him or her, right? We can wash the baby on Shabbos. We can cut the umbilical cord. We can straighten his limbs. Right? It's the oisim like called tzaracha. We can do anything that he needs or that she needs, that the child needs, anything the newborn needs. However, im eina ben kayama, if it's not going to survive the child. Now, the example we're going to give now doesn't apply today so much, thank God. Going for an example, Schneider the Shemone Chodashim was born a month premature. Today with the incubator, they have these little like boxes they put the children in. You can have
isolates, right?
Yes, you can. The children even several months early can survive, but in the past, if they were a month early, then God forbid. But if for some other reason that we see for sure it's not going to survive, then as soon as the total it becomes muksa. We can't move it at all. Now, obviously, if there's even a possibility we can help it survive, then we do whatever we can do. And but even in that case, the mother can nurse the child because it's painful for the mother if she needs to nurse. Okay. So that is that chapter. It's a horrible place to leave a chapter on, isn't it? But they haven't survived. So that Baruch Hashem, it's we should never know such things. We should only have happy occasions and children born healthy children, healthy mothers. It should be all very nice. Okay. Any questions? Can we move on to the next chapter? No. Okay. Yeah. No. Okay. Chapter 95. Simon Sadik Dalid. We're going to speak about Erev Chatzeros. So let's give an introduction. We mentioned that there are two main types. There's
it's
four
94,
types of domain on
Rabbi.
Shabbos. Sorry?
That's 94, correct?
Yeah, 94.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's four types of domain on Shabbos, but there's two main types. The main types are the Reshus HaYochid, the private domain. Now, private domain does not necessarily mean privately owned. It could be owned by an organization or by the city. What it means, though, is that it's fenced, it's closed in, it's protected, and it's within a certain size. So we'll just keep it simple, and we'll say a house. Our house, right? That's a private domain, but it could also be technically, from a biblical perspective, a shopping mall, a park that's closed in, a synagogue. But we're going to see it's not always the case. Yeah, the public domain, the Reshus HaRabim, again, it can be privately owned. That's not what we mean by public. But what we mean is that it's not fenced in. Again, it has to be a certain size, a minimum size. And people have access to go through. And really, you need 600,000 people a day to go through for it to be a real public domain. Then we have two other types of domain which don't quite meet the requirements of these other two. So let's give a simple example. We have a house which is the private domain. We have the major highway in a big city, which, well, depends what city you're in, but in many cities is a real public domain, right? The 600,000 people go on it every day. Then you have the roads in between. So, you know, I don't know about the street you live on, but the street I live on does not have 600,000 people every day. It has the width to be a public domain, has all the other characteristics, but it's not quite. And if you live particularly in a suburban street, and in older cities where the roads are narrower, you know, they were made for horses, before they had cars, you live in those older areas, it might not even be wide enough to be a public domain. So it's in between. So it's in between. This is called a caramelis. So a caramelis is, it meets almost all the requirements of the public domain, but there's something missing, either the size, the amount of people, or something else. Okay, is that all clear so far? Because we're just going to keep building on this. So if something's not clear, please ask now. Okay. So this intermediate domain, Torah law, you're allowed to carry there. The problem is our sages had a concern as follows. Let's say I live on a smaller suburban street, and that meets up with a big main road that's a real public domain. The problem is if I can carry out of my house, which technically I can, and I carry on the street, on my street, then what might happen is I might keep carrying when I step onto this big main road, which meets all the requirements. And that's going to be a biblical prohibition. That's concern number one. Concern number two, as not everyone knows the laws of what makes a real public domain and what makes this caramelis, this almost public domain, people might mistakenly think, well, if I can carry on this street, I can carry on another street. Or perhaps I'm always allowed to carry on a street and not realize and end up carrying in the public domain, which is something we can't do. So therefore, the sages, when I say the sages, we're talking about the times of King David, King Solomon, made a decree that we cannot carry even in the caramelis. We can't carry in this middle area, only in the private domains. Once we step outside the private domain, we cannot carry anywhere else. We got that step clear. Please, any questions? If you have questions, because it said now we're going to build another step in a minute. So is good. Okay. So what they did though is when they said that we can't carry in this intermediate domain, they gave us an out. They said that we can build an Eruv. We can make an Eruv. Now, an Eruv, it's some type of partnership that we make it into a private domain. And there's a lot of leniencies compared to how we would have to close in a real public domain to be able to carry, because it's not a biblical public domain. So let me explain what I mean by that. So let's say we had this massive city, and it's got this one massive main road that goes all the way through, and you have 1 million people go on it every day, and it's a walled city, but you've got big gates, you know, big wide gates that can let in thousands of people, hundreds of people at a time at each end of the city. So this massive road is a public domain. Now, the only way that we could close it off is to put walls. Divide it with walls, real walls. And we'd make a section of it, a closed-in area. It's no longer part of the public domain, and we could carry there. But the intermediate domain, the one that biblically you could carry, but rabbinically we can't, out of concern that'll lead to carrying in a real public domain, this we can close in much more lenient ways. So if you look, for an example, at most city Erevs, if you live in a city where there's an Erev, most of the way we close it in is making door frames. It's not a wall, it's a door frame. So they normally use the power lines. So they use it can't be the regular power lines that just go across the middle or from pole to pole. It has to be on top, or they make a contraption on the side to make it on top of that contraption. So you actually got a door frame. You've got a side post and a frame on top, even though part of the frame is actually a wire. So you wouldn't normally have a wall just made of door frames. You might have a door frame in the wall because you have to get in and out, but a normal wall would not all be door frames. So therefore you can't use a wall of door frames in a real biblical public domain. Only in this Carmelist, the intermediate one. Okay, so that's introduction part 1. How do we go with that? Crystal clear, clear as mud. As we said before, when there's silence, it means one of 3 things. 1, I explained it so well, there's nothing to ask. 2, I explained it so poorly, no one has even the slightest idea what to ask. Or 3, it was so boring, no one was listening.
Rabbi Wernick?
Yes.
Could you just run that last bit about the door frame when you're making the intermediate area into a one with an A roof? Could you just run that by me again?
Yeah, so this intermediate area, the Carmelists, we'll often close it in. We don't have to put proper walls. I mean, if we can, that's better. But, in most cities, we can't put a wall across the road on Shabbos. The city won't like that. But we run wires, let's say from the power posts, and that makes a door frame. So you got one post with a wire running across the top to the next post. And so those 2 power or light posts, or whatever happens to be, are like door frames. And the wire going across is the lintel, it's the top of the door frame. And so we have a wall made up of door frame and next to another door frame, next to another door frame, and that closes in the Erev. Okay, did that answer your question?
Yes, at least up to the point that you were discussing that particular type of Kabbalist.
So I didn't hear what you said.
I said up to the point that you were discussing that particular type of intermediate Kabbalist.
Yeah. So that's how we would close it in. Yes, Susan, you have a question?
Is there a real wall or just the wires?
So in a Carmelist, it's not a real public domain. We will be happy just have the door frame, just the wires.
Okay.
If it's a real public domain, then we're going to need a real wall to close it.
Okay. All right. Now I understand.
Okay.
Right.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Rabbi, could you give us an example? I mean, that we might be familiar with having seen.
For an example of the different domains?
Of this type of a Kabbalist that's made with like door frames and wires.
So what city do you live in?
Miami, North Miami.
Okay, so there's an Erev there. So
yeah.
if you ever look at the map where the Erev is, you'll see the borders. I mean, part of it I know they use the natural water to make for some of it, but some of it there's actual wire. There's a post with a wire that goes across, and that makes the door frames from post to post. The wire runs from one post then to another post. sort of wraps around each post as it gets there to make a door frame.
But
I mean,
Rabbi,
I'm actually trying to visualize in Brooklyn, in Miami, in Chicago. I'm trying to visualize these areas, and
Yeah, so Brooklyn's another story, because Brooklyn, you have roads, you know, like the parkways and different things that have 600,000 people going it each day. So that's a real public domain, and that becomes a lot harder. You know, the type of Eruv that we use in other places, you probably couldn't use. But
Rabbi,
yes.
can I add to it? I think the posts have to also be connected to the Eruv itself with wire.
Well, they are the Eruv. The posts and the wires going across them are the Eruv.
But two posts don't create an Eruv.
No, two posts is the door frame, and then it goes to another.
What's besides the two, to the left and the right of those posts?
Another post with the wire
That's what I'm
going
saying,
makes another
they're
door
connected
frame.
to the
Next to it is
Eruv.
another post.
Yeah, they have to be connected to the
Right, so
Eruv
eventually
itself.
close in the whole area, correct. So
Yeah.
these door frames close in the entire area, or the door frames in other structures. So the Eruv here, you know, half of it is closed in by the canal and the freeway. So the freeway has a big wall inside the freeway. But the other half, we use the post to make door frame after door frame after door frame to connect up between the canal and the freeway, and then from the other side of the canal back to the freeway. So correct, it's a good point. It actually has to be closed. To make the Eruv, we have to close it in. Right?
It has to be connected to a
use these door
fence
frames to
or
close it in.
something. Yeah, the fence or something that's from the Eruv.
Yeah. David, do you want to ask something?
Yeah, I wanted to know, generally speaking, how cooperative are most cities in the United States that people request that there should be an Eruv allowed connected to the electric poles?
So
Are they cooperative or not?
unless you're dealing with anti-Semites, which sometimes happens, usually the larger the fee, the more interested they are. That's how it works, right? So in other words, every city has to maintain its infrastructure, and if a Jewish community is willing to contribute, they're normally very happy to take the funds. So, you know, unless there's been, I think, look, I'm not going to say every person who objects to an Eruv is an anti-Semite. Some people are misinformed, or perhaps it's a very poorly planned Eruv and it really creates concerns. But majority of the time, it's existing poles, very few additional poles, very few, if any, additional wiring. Sometimes has to be wired differently, but whoever's building, the community is building the Eruv pays for that. So I know in Australia, Melbourne, the original Eruv, there was a new telephone company coming. It used to be, it was just one telephone company. It was a government telephone company, and they changed the laws to allow private phone companies. And so this company came in, it didn't have any infrastructure yet. They're setting up. The Jewish community said, well, we'll contribute to the poles. You know, you're going to put the phone poles, but we'd like you to do it in this way, which once they're setting up from scratch, it doesn't cost any more or less to them. So from their perspective, you know, they got an upfront fee and a yearly fee for not really doing anything different. So they're quite happy to oblige.
But Rabbi, it does
Yeah.
include extra wiring, because you have to bring down wire from the one you're using on top down to the ground.
Not
On
necessarily.
on the pole itself. And you have to put a cover on that wire and bring it down to the ground.
No, you don't need to bring the wire to the ground. When they put the piece on the pole, that's because the wire doesn't run across the top of the pole. So they put a piece on the side of the pole and the wire runs the top of that piece. Look, sometimes there is extra wiring, but not necessarily.
Yeah, from the ground on the pole, that's extra wiring. You know?
It doesn't go from the
No.
top to the bottom. The wire just
Yeah,
runs
but
across the
even
top.
if you start from the ground, you have to go up the pole with a wire, right?
You don't need to start at the
No.
ground.
No, usually I'm
You can just do the top of all the poles all the way around.
Okay, but at some point, it has to be connected to the ground.
The poles
Only
do
the
that.
poles. The poles connect to the ground,
The pole is wood.
So
correct.
what?
and that's a good door frame.
Not a problem.
Because we built
They're the side posts. The poles are the side
here.
posts, and the
We built
wire
an
is the
Eruv
top
here
post.
a
Cross
few
beam.
years ago. Rabbi, we built an Eruv here a few years ago,
Yeah,
and when we were checking the Eruv, we had to check that there is a wire coming down to the ground.
No.
whatever, maybe there was some topographical feature, there was something there that they had to do that, or the ground was raised and that was part of the wall. I couldn't comment without seeing it,
Yeah.
but it must have been something unique to
And when
how
we
that angle was actually
transferred from the electric wires to the fence, again, there was a connection from the fence to the pole.
Right, because the fence is part of the enclosure. Now, you
Yeah.
could have used poles for the entire enclosure, but if you do a fence,
They
that's going
don't
to join
always
to the
have
fence.
poles where you want them to be.
That is
So
true, right?
they use part fence and part poles, yeah.
That's right. So if that's the case, then yes, has to connect to the fence. The fence is
Yeah.
part of it.
Okay,
So now there's something else we need to mention. So let's say a gated community. Let's use that as an example. So the gated community. So let's say you have, let's make up a number. You got 20 townhouses, or 20 houses, 20 apartments inside this gated shared property. So again, on a biblical level, you could carry there because it's fenced in. There's not really public thoroughfare. There's not many people walking through. On a biblical level, you could carry there. But once you step out of your house, this gated community has courtyards and walkways and maybe driveways, and maybe you can drive around the whole thing, has its own little roads. So then comes the same concern that it looks too similar to a real public domain. And therefore, on a rabbinical level, and rabbinical meaning from the time of the prophets already, we can't carry there either. Now here, we don't need to build an Eruv, right? So there's two parts of an Eruv. There's the enclosure. And then what we do is we turn the area into a private domain by having a shared kitchen. So back to the city Eruv for a moment. Wherever you have a city Eruv, there's somewhere inside the Eruv, usually one of the synagogues, that there's some food stored. And in theory, anyone can help themselves on Shabbos to that food because we've closed it in and we've made a shared kitchen. So we essentially turned all the area inside the Eruv into one house. Right, so if we're going to make an Eruv in a gated community, then let's presume everyone's Jewish, just to make it simpler, because it gets a little more complicated where some are Jewish, some not Jewish, and we'll talk about that when we get to the laws. But let's presume everyone's Jewish. So everyone needs to chip in towards the food. Everyone needs to join in. And normally what people do is they use matzah because you can put it there for the whole year. And you don't have to worry about replacing it every week. But if you had fresh food, you'd have to replace it every week. So you put the food somewhere, whether it's one person's house or it's the office or whatever it happens to be in this gated community. And in theory, anyone can come and take it. I emphasize in theory because even though if the food's stored in my house, even though everyone has the right to come get some of the food, I don't have to give them free access at 3 o'clock in the morning, right? You know, they can wait. So, but in concept, everyone has access to the food and they can eat it as they wish. And we turn the entire community into one large house. It would be sort of like, sometimes people have a property, usually it's like a vacation property, it's on some acreage, and there's a few cabins, and everyone eats in the main dining room, and you go up there with the extended family, and this one stays in this cabin, this one stays in this cabin, it's all closed in, it's all fenced in, you all eat in the main dining room. So it's one large property with one kitchen, one eating area, and so it's like one big house with a bunch of guest rooms. And that's what we turn the inside of an Eruv into, at least from halachic perspective. Okay. The Eruv, if we have people, so let's go back to the city Eruv. And again, it's just to get these concepts clear, so when we learn it, we understand. In the city Eruv, we have a lot of people who, Jewish and not Jewish, who may not even know about such a thing as an Eruv. They certainly don't care about it, and they have no interest in contributing. So how do we have an Eruv without them being part of it? So essentially what we do is their specific property is not part of it, but all the public areas you rent from the city. Because at the end of the day, the city is the owner, or at least the controller of all the little roads in an area. Now, sometimes freeways might be the state, but generally, if you're talking about a suburban area, the city is the one that's in charge, the parks, the roads, all these various things. So we rent from them. So on Shabbos, we have all the rights in concept, right? And that's why it all becomes part of the Eruv, even if some of the people who live in the Eruv are not part of it, because it's only their houses, and their houses aren't large enough to disrupt the entire Eruv. Yeah, David.
This Eruv food, let's say like a matzah, if somebody comes and eats this Eruv food, is that like an emergency situation that everybody's carrying without the food?
No, so it has to exist throughout the twilight period. Once Shabbos begins, then the Eruv was good when Shabbos began. So
So is there a person that checks to make sure that the food is intact?
Before Shabbos begins?
Oh, on a regular basis?
Well, before each Shabbos begins, the whole Eruv should be checked, every aspect of it. So they should look at, they should make sure there's food. They should check the boundaries, make sure no wires came down or fence fell down or whatever it is. So the entire Eruv needs to be checked every week. And as part of that, you can't use an Eruv without checking it yourself. Now, again, every city is different, but in Phoenix, they have a system where, people pay their annual fee, and there's a WhatsApp message that goes out every Friday with the status of the Eruv. So that's one way that you can tell, right? So I didn't check it personally, but someone checks it and they give me the information, and I'm relying, so that's one way. There's an Eruv in, I think Queens. I don't recall now. The whole thing is a wire and there's electric circuit. And as long as the Eruv is up, there's a light bulb in front of the shul that's on. Right? If the Eruv goes down, it breaks somewhere, the circuit gets broken, and the light goes off. So that's how everyone knows. They go out of shul, if there's the lights on, the Eruv is up. Now, so there's lots of different ways to do it, but a person needs to check before Shabbos, before they rely on the Eruv. Or at least get information from someone else who checked. Okay, so that is yes.
I'm sorry. There are cases down here where there are very bad storms occasionally, or a hurricane
Yes.
type of torment. So the thing is that it can happen. I remember certain instances where people were saying, oh, we don't know if the Eruv is still up, or we have to check the Eruv, but that actually was happening on Shabbat. So then what?
Yeah.
Would we
So-
assume that it's not up?
If there was a tornado or something, like, a hurricane, I would have the presumption that A was down.
That storm.
Yeah. So if it's just a heavy storm, then I think you're probably relying on it. But once it gets beyond the norm that, things start to fall down, then I think you should run with that, with the presumption that Eruv is
Down. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
okay. The only time that you probably say perhaps be more lenient is if you need fresh water. So if the last you heard the Eruv was up, there's nothing to tell you that it's down, and it's not a biblical public domain, and for some reason there's no fresh water, then you could rely on the fact that it was up to get fresh water. If everything else, or you have water and things, then and obviously if someone's injured in a hurricane and various things, we're back to the life-threatening situation, or and we do whatever we need to do, Eruv or not Eruv.
If that's on heat, turn it off. Mitch, if that's a heater, turn it off.
It's not, it's a fan.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So one last piece of information before we begin. The way that people lived in Talmudic times, so it's used as the example, is people lived usually 4 houses around the courtyard, and several courtyards had its own sort of alley. We'll call it driveway because, not that they had cars then, but that's what you brought your donkey down, and that was how you walked down to access to your courtyard. But it wasn't a public thoroughfare. It's not to say that someone couldn't walk through. Sometimes these alleys were open on both ends. They open both ends to roads. So sometimes people might use it as a shortcut, but essentially all that's on this little road / alley / driveway are the courtyards on either side. So normally, unless you're going to one of the courtyards, you don't go down there. So you had these little roads, and off them were courtyards, and there was usually 4 houses. The number is relevant. Once it's 2, once it's more than a private courtyard, once you have someone else there, it becomes the same issue, whether it's 2 or 100. But happened to be there was normally 4, and they had, however long this road was, you had courtyard after courtyard on both sides, and that's how people lived. So this is used as a prototype to explain the different laws. So today, most of us don't live like that. If we live in a house, our yard is our own private yard, or if you live in a apartment building, then the shared area is like the courtyard. So if you live in an apartment complex, all the common areas, the hallways, stairwells, the foyer, that's like the shared area of a courtyard in these Talmudic times. Same a gated community, etc. Okay, so now that we spent almost the entire shiur giving introduction, let's learn something. Okay, number 1. Shnei Yisraelim or Yoiser Hadarim b'chotzer achas. You have a situation where 2 Jews or more live in one courtyard. So if it's easier for you to imagine the house around the courtyard, you can imagine that. If it's easier for you to imagine an apartment building or some type of shared complex like that, then imagine that. But it's common areas with at least two Jews or more, 2 different homes. So not 2 Jews that share a house. If you have flat, apartment, you share an apartment or you share a house, that's one domain. Each person has their own house. They sleep in their own house, they eat in their own house. But there's a shared common area. Each person living in his own apartment. Then, you can't carry Loy min abotim l'chotza, you can't carry from the house into the courtyard or any other shared areas. I'm just using courtyard as example, but again, the hallways of an apartment, the street of a gated community, whatever it is, you can't carry from the houses to the common areas. Loy min l'chotza l'abotim, nor can you carry from the common areas into the house. The loy mabayis the bias, and not from house to house, right? Maybe at a house close enough, you just pass from window to window without going into the common area. So you can't do that either. But even if you can pass from one house to the other house, one apartment to another apartment, without going through the common area, so you are higher than the airspace of the common area, you can just pass from window to window. If you're going to Pesach, for example, there was a window or a door between one house and another house, and that might even be through a shared wall. Asur in the Talmud Derech Sham, you can't carry, you can't move things through this opening. And there's a mitzvah for these people to make what's called a Rudei Chatzeros, an Eruv of courtyards. And a city Eruv is just a courtyard Eruv on steroids. It's just a bigger, larger version of the same thing. And the reason we should make an Eruv in a courtyard is because we don't want people to do something wrong by mistake. Because most people are used to every other day, you have something in your apartment and you walk out the door to the hallway of the apartment building, and you walk out to the foyer and you go to the common courtyard or yard, or you sit by the swimming pool or on a common balcony. You're used to doing this. So just out of habit, chances are you can do it on Shabbos. So if we have Jews living together, we should make this Eruv of this courtyard of the shared property. And that way, people can go about what they normally do without accidentally doing the wrong thing. And that's also the rationale behind many city Eruvs. So sometimes it's just to make life more convenient. You know, people aren't worried about others. They just want to make their own life more convenient. And there's nothing wrong with that also. But usually, one of the main reasons that rabbis or communal organizations get involved is exactly for this reason, that people shouldn't carry in these areas and break Shabbos, when we can set up an Eruv, and then they're allowed to carry in that. Particularly when we have a lot of Jews who don't know about Shabbos properly, perhaps they don't know about how to keep Shabbos properly or realize how important it is. And by having an Eruv, we save them from doing the wrong thing. Yeah, David.
I'm just wondering where it says two or more Jews, each one living in his own house. So God forbid a lady marries a non-Jew. So is she counted as the two or more Jews, even though she's maybe not the owner of the house, it's maybe the non-Jewish husband, or how does that work? Or is that a whole kettle of
She's going to
fish
be
for
considered
different-
a Jewish resident there as well, yeah. Okay. So, till now we spoke about the different homes in the same courtyard, or the different apartments in the same apartment building. So we'll try and make an Eruv between them so you can carry in the building or in the shared courtyard of whatever happens to be. Number two is one step further. Let's say you have two courtyards that share a door, some type of opening. So let's give an example. You have a few townhouses on one property, and next door there's the same thing, another few townhouses in their own fenced-in property, but there's an opening between the two. Right? There's access between the two. Now, imroitzim, if you want, you can have each of these two courtyards or more could be more than 2. They can have each of these courtyards make their own independent Eruv. In which case, all the members of each courtyard can carry in their own courtyard and only their own courtyard. But they can't transfer things from one courtyard to the other courtyard that were in the homes. That's option number 1. Vim writes him, but if they want, all the residents of both courtyards, or more than 2, but in this case both, could make one large Eruv together, combined Eruv. And that way we can carry things from one courtyard to another courtyard, even things that were in a house. When Shabbos began, I can take from the house to the courtyard, to the other courtyard, to another house in the other courtyard. Right, so we have the option of which one to do. If everyone's okay to go another 2 minutes, we'll finish the chapter. Now, you need to have the opening, the minimum. So if you have a door, that's great. Whole big fence, that's even better. But minimum is even if you just have a window and it's 4 tefachim wide. Now, fist is, I'm not threatening you with my fist, God forbid. Tefach is the width of a fist, right? So it's 4 tefachim wide, the Gavoya Bam tefachim, and it's 4 tefachim high. So it's 4 by 4. So even if this opening is only a 4 tefach by 4 tefach window, so the Seich Asara tefachim, Samach La'aretz, and it's within 10 tefachim from the ground. The Ein Boi Suriga, right? And there's no like a blockage between the two, right? There's no sort of gate or blockage or screen, bars, right? There's nothing there blocking between the two. You can also make an Eruv in between, right? Because a person can call through that space, right? You can put things through. But if the opening is smaller than that, it's less than 4 by 4. Then you can't make one Eruv. You have to, each courtyard has to make their own. And if you got a window between 2 houses, even if it's higher than 10 tefachim, the houses can make joint between the 2. Right, because inside the house, it's a norm to stand on furniture and different things if you want to reach up higher on step stool or on a chair, but you wouldn't do that in the outside. Okay, so we'll go over this a little bit again next week. Any questions? All right, so to be continued.
Thank you, Rabbi. Good Shabbos.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you,
Shabbos,
everybody.
everyone.
Shabbos shalom. Thank
Bye-bye,
you.
everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
It was
Mary, you have a
very, it was very appropriate that you dealt with what you can do if a baby is born on Shabbos, because our granddaughter is scheduled to go in tomorrow, which is Erev Shabbos, to have labor induced.
Okay, well, it should be Shabbos.
B'shar tova.
Should be a good
Thank
and
you.
auspicious time, and everyone in good health.
Amen.
Amen.
We look forward to
Thank
wishing you
you.
Mazel Tov next lesson, God willing.
Thank
giving
you for
Kiddush, yeah.
your wishes last week for an amazing Shabbos. I
Well,
wish
we
the
should have,
same to you.
you should have double amazing this Shabbos, God willing, and everyone else as well. The wonderful week.
Thank you.
Take
You
care.
too.